everybody. My name is Alex. And our partner is Gloria. She's recording. Our project is dealing with adhesives, and we are specifically characterizing electrically conductive adhesives for use with smart wearable technology. Our advisor is Dr. Folarin Erogbogbo, and our Jabil advisor is Hansi. We'll be going over the background information, biomedical motivation, market analysis, FDA considerations, experimental design, and we'll talk about the minimum criteria we had to choose adhesives. We'll talk about our methods, results, and conclusions. And then at the end, we'll talk about our cost analysis, future work, and go over some acknowledgements. So first of all, what are ECAs? ECAs are electrically conductive adhesives that contain a conductive filler material that allows them to be used as secondary level interconnects. Think solder, but in an adhesive form. They could be in gel, paste, or film types. ECAs are typically thermosetting. They're isotropic, which means they conduct in the XYZ axis, and they're more commonly available, making them cheaper. Anisotropic adhesives are also available, but they only conduct in the Z-axis. They're more expensive, and they require more heat and pressure to cure.
All right, so for our background, wearable patches was the big driver of our project. This is where we think the market is going, and wearable patches has a lot of application in the biomedical field. In both clinical and non-clinical patches is class 1 devices, class 2 devices such as electrodes, and even class 3 devices. Maybe someday there will be a flexible pacemaker. And it's important that this adhesive is an alternative to lead-free silver-based solder. A big part of that is the flexibility. The flexible substrate will start to degrade at a certain temperature. Solder runs very hot at over 200 degrees C. The substrate we chose, a PET, starts to experience shrinkage at around 150 C and starts to degrade at 180 C. So finding an adhesive that cured below these temperatures was very important in designing a flexible patch. So our BME motivation is that sensors are already out there on the market that our wearable patches could be used for, such as sensing hydration levels for athletes, heart rate for people who are sick, blood O2 levels for people with diabetes, and blood sugar levels also for people with diabetes. We could also add wireless transmission. The Internet of Things is very big right now. Being able to send health data to the cloud, to a wireless device, is huge. Just being able to coordinate that and to be able to compile that into a single database. The great thing about flexible patches is that these are already existing devices by the FDA. They have their own product codes. They have their own 510Ks. All we're doing is changing the substrate. And what that means is that we can use those same product codes. We can use the same regulatory pathways that they went through to make these new patches.
And this is the market analysis. So based on our market analysis research, we have found that the global wearable patch market for clinical wearable technology is set to grow for a compound annual growth rate of about 81%, while non-clinical segment is to grow more than 110%. And this is mainly due to the rise in lifestyle of diabetes, a lifestyle changes in consumers, and a lot of individuals who are becoming self-aware of taking better care of their health and their overall well-being, and also due to the fact that healthcare costs is really high in the US, and so people are taking active measures to prevent their health from deteriorating and to maintain a healthy lifestyle.
Right. So our FDA considerations, as I said before, a lot of this, we would be using a lot of the same product codes. This is just one example. This is for a patch that uses a rigid sensor with a just a dumb component, just a sticky patch that the rigid sensor goes on. This uses product code DXH. It measures cardiovascular activity while also reporting it to a separate location. And as I said before, you can use similar sensors, but use the same product code because you're not changing the intended use, you're just changing the substrate. So you're making it thinner, you're miniaturizing it, and you're making it so that you can use those sensors and those same product codes. Although, one last thing, the biocompatibility of the patches must still be verified, just because these are new materials in terms of conductive adhesives. But they would still use the same product codes, the same regulations, but biocompatibility is important. We're working with new devices, so have to verify that.
And so for experimental design, we're going to be testing two electrical properties, following resistivity and conductivity retention under flex, and one test under mechanical properties, which is shear strength. And so for the volume resistivity, we'll have two levels of thickness for the test, and the substrate material that we'll be using is stainless steel. For shear strength, it's a range from 0 to around 980 newtons, and the substrate will be tested under two different types of substrate, which would be tin substrate and PET with the ink, with silver ink on top of it. And then for conductivity retention under flex test, we'll have one flexural weight, and we'll be testing for adhesives for this experiment, and they'll be known as A, B, C, and D.
Our minimum criteria for selecting adhesives are based on these 5 data points. It has to have a resistivity of less than 0.001 ohm centimeters. Cure time should be less than 1 hour. Cure temperature is less than 150 degrees Celsius because PET will degrade at that point, and we want to keep the temperature as low as possible. Pot life should be greater than 1 hour, and shelf life is greater than 1 year for manufacturability purposes. At the end of the criteria, we had 4 adhesives tested. Unfortunately, some of them didn't match completely. Adhesive C had a node resistivity of 0.005 ohm centimeters instead of less than 0.001. Adhesive B only has a shelf life of 121 days, and adhesive D has a shelf life of only 4 months, which is not a huge issue in terms of manufacturability, but it is still an issue nonetheless. One adhesive was unable to be tested due to vendor delay, so that was the only setback we had.
All right, so this is our experimental flow chart. We started with isotropic ECAs, and then we narrowed them down using the data sheets. Once we narrowed them down in the data sheets, we moved on to bench testing with conductivity testing, flex testing, and in-house shear testing. Once those results were obtained, then we would formulate our various lists. After we formulated those lists and ranks, we would then come up with an analysis and results and discussion of those ranks and try to figure out, now that we have this information, how can we apply it to Jabil? So this is our conductivity test method. The way this method works is that you have 2 metal coupons and you have adhesive in between, and you measure the volume resistivity or the observed resistivity by taking the potential drop across this adhesive. So we use 2 stainless steel coupons. Stainless steel is affordable. It's metal. The resistivity is low, so it probably wouldn't interfere with our adhesive. And it was using a proven ASTM standard. We wanted to keep very close to the standard because developing and refining the standard would be a senior project unto itself. Unfortunately, our conductivity test was inconclusive. The reason it was inconclusive is because adhesive B and D failed to bond to the metal coupons, while adhesives A and C showed inconsistent readings, demonstrating a resistivity gap of greater than 500 milliohms and a base resistivity of much higher than 10 milliohms. So failure analysis using a SEM was performed to determine what went wrong. For adhesive A, where conductivity was a problem and consistency was a problem, we found that there was an uneven distribution of silver particles. The more silver particles in the adhesive, the more conductive it would be. But at and certain coupons, there were not as many silver particles as the more conductive ones. So something in the future will have to be done to control that. For adhesive B, you can see a formation of a layer, or it could be a crack with contamination in it. The problem with that was that it formed weak points within that adhesive bond, points where the adhesive snapped, basically, on the microscopic level. And what that meant was that it didn't have the strength to support the weight of the stainless steel coupons. Adhesive C had the strength to support the coupons, but there were void areas. There were large air bubbles in certain parts. There are void areas devoid of the silver, which actually makes the conductivity happen. And there's no consistency between it, which meant that there was a large range. There was no telling this coupon is going to have more void versus this coupon is going to have less void. And that gave us a large resistivity range, and which made the results unusable. Adhesive D lacked the strength. You can tell this because it's filled with silver. A general rule of thumb for conductive adhesives is that the more conductive material you have, the less bonding material you have. Therefore, the strength is less. It did not have the strength to support the weight of these stainless steel coupons, and therefore it just fell apart.
For the shear test method, we use the ASTM standard F1995-13. And to follow the standard, we had to use a Norson Gauge Series 4000 bond tester. And here's a cross-section of what the test setup will look like. For the one where we're testing the PET with silver ink, we have the IECA puck, and then we have the silver ink. Following that is the PET, then the adhesives that's connecting the PET to the copper coupon for stability. And then the other substrate that we're testing, the tin substrate, on top of that is just the adhesive on top of it. So for the results, there are 3 different types of result failures. We have adhesive failure, where the adhesive separates from the substrate. We have cohesive failure, where the retraction of particles within the adhesive that holds the mass together breaks apart. And then the substrate failure is where the substrate breaks. For the average shear strength, A and C displayed really high shear strength compared to B and D. And all of them except for A displayed a cohesive failure. And over here you can see what a cohesive failure looks like. You still see a thin layer of the adhesive still attached to the substrate. And this is what the adhesives look like when they're cured on the tin sheet. The next test, where we did on the PET with ink covered on top of it, it's a similar results to the tin substrate, A and C, just like the previous test, displayed significant higher shear strength compared to B and D. And in this test, the substrates with really high shear strength, the adhesives with really high shear strength, when they are sheared off, the ink completely comes off from the PET, and this will be under the substrate failure. And over here you can see what the cohesive failure looks like when there are cracks and still a layer of the adhesive is attached to the ink.
In our last test with the Flexural Test, we followed ASTM F2750 to measure the resistance during flexural cycling of the substrate. Here's the setup of the substrates. PET is the bottom layer, and then you make 2 silver ink layers with a bridge in the middle to be bridged by the adhesives. Adhesives in the middle will bridge the circuit and finish the circuit, and then you put copper wires in these adhesive pucks on the side to be able to measure the resistance with a data logger. The size of the pucks is 4.5 millimeters in diameter, and then they're 1.96 millimeters thick. The placement of these adhesive pucks on the ends does not matter because you're measuring the change in resistance over time, not the resistance of the circuit itself. Here's the setup. Here you can see the substrate as tested, the adhesive bridging the 2 silver ink gaps, 2 silver ink layers, and then the adhesive here and adhesive here containing the wires for measuring the resistance. On the test setup, the shimpo is here to cycle the test. It's clamped on by 2 clamps found in the shop, and then the weight is supported by the substrate itself. So in your testing, it would look like this. It would hold the weight, the pen is the weight, and then it would cycle up and down. And then you would measure the resistance as that happened. And here are the results. Adhesive A, it starts with the circuit intact, and then within the first bend cycle, the circuit breaks, and it repeats over time. So each of these little dots on top is the circuit breaking. Adhesive B looks promising at first, the circuit didn't break, but then it breaks at the end of the 10th cycle. Adhesive C had the same results as adhesive A. It would maintain the circuit, and then it breaks, and then it maintains the circuit again once the circuit is flat. And then as the weight cycles through, the circuit will break. Our most promising results were from adhesive D. Even though resistance increased dramatically, it did not break the circuit. And this is from extensive testing. Past 10 cycles, which is our maximum number of cycles actually, the circuit did fine. But after the 10th cycle, the resistance started to increase due to heat. The heat increases resistance, but normally you're not going to see that. This is just for durability testing. For our total results, conductivity testing, as we said before, was inconclusive. A and C had a conductive failure, and then B and D had a bond failure. In the shear strength test, the best adhesive that for PET ink was Adhesive A, and then the best adhesive for tin sheet was Adhesive C. And then flex test only had 2 to really pass the test, Adhesive D and B, even though B failed ultimately at the end. So we would recommend Adhesive D as our overall recommendation.
So for conductivity test, it proved inconclusive. So what we'd like to do in future work is we'd like to establish some sort of alternative test method. With the standard we were using, it was relatively a lot of adhesive. It's not really applicable to a real-world patch application or a real-world circuit. So reevaluating that standard and redefining it and redesigning it could get you more results. It could give you valid results. When we performed failure analysis under a SEM, we found problems that were not visible to the naked eye. With Adhesive A, we had problems with particle distribution, which affected that reliability. With Adhesive B, it just didn't have the strength, as well as there may have been some sort of crack or layer formation. Adhesive C had a tendency to form voids and craters, just areas where there was no filler of conductive material, and that would then cause a spike in resistivity. And Adhesive D, which just had so much silver on it, it did not have the strength to support the weight of the metal coupons.
And for shear strength, Adhesive A and C both has shown that they have the highest shear strength for both PET and ink substrate and tin substrate. However, when it comes to the Flexural Test, they failed due to how hard the adhesives become when they are cured. Therefore, Adhesive D, when it's cured, it's not as hard as Adhesive A and C. So during the flex testing, it's able to perform pretty well.
And then for Adhesive D, our flex testing actually, Adhesive D performs very well due to its urethane composition. So adhesives are made from different polymers. Urethane is one of them, silicone could be another, epoxy is another as well. But due to its urethane composition, Adhesive D did very well. And then it's important to remember that this is very application specific. So you might not need a very high shear strength, but you can use Adhesive D as long as your shear strength requirement is very low, 5 to 10 newtons in our testing.
And this is just a cost analysis of the project. For table 6, you can see the breakdown of the materials that we use, such as adhesive, silver ink, tin sheets, and etc. For table 7, you can see the total budget. So the materials, the cost of the equipment usage, the labor, and the overall cost of this project.
So for future work, one of our first steps is to redesign the conductivity test to obtain valid volume resistivity results. We still believe that volume resistivity holds important results that we need to see and we need to verify before you use an adhesive. It also needs to find a different method to be able to test adhesives that don't have the bonding strength for those heavy coupons, but have the bonding strength for a small circuit within a flexible patch. This test also allows us to expand the minimum criteria to cover a wider range of conductive adhesives. We narrowed it down to 4 using very narrow criteria. But the great thing about this project and the great thing about this test is that you can expand this criteria for whatever your application needs. Say you only want to look at waterproof adhesives for a hydration patch. Say you want to look at adhesives that are a certain color or use a different conductor other than silver. Those are all things you can do with these processes. We'd also like to reach out to vendors to develop an adhesive that performs well under the flex and shear test. Based on the data we found, we can tell, like, these are the characteristics of the adhesives that performed well. So can you make us an adhesive like that? Or is there anything in development like that? This is what we found. What can you do with it? One of our last steps in future work, far out in the future work, would be creating a prototype patch with a basic sensor and then using the conductive adhesive. So this would be a real world application of our patch. This would be what the patch would look like in the real world. Would it be able to withstand the stresses of the real world? Would it be able to find relevant data on a human body or on a simulated human body?
And then finally, we'd like to thank our advisors, the several advisors we had. Dr. Erogbogbo, thank you very much for your contributions to our assignment. Thank you to Rosa Jabil, one of the managers here at Jabil. And then Hansi was our main advisor here at Jabil. He helped us a lot with the thought process and just figuring out what our project was and how to go through with it. And thank you very much to everybody at Jabil who helped us with our project. Some references for the images and references that we used. Thank you very much.